In a landmark decision that will echo through the halls of government and the corridors of commerce, the Supreme Court has struck down the Trump administration's sweeping tariff plan, fundamentally shifting the balance of power in American trade policy and redefining the relationship between the executive branch and Congress. For years, businesses and consumers faced economic uncertainty under these tariffs, with prices rising on everyday goods and supply chains thrown into disarray. Now, that landscape is irrevocably changed, as the court's decision brings both relief and new questions for the American economy. The ruling is a clear check on executive authority, sending a powerful message about the limits of presidential power in matters of national and international consequence, forcing the nation to confront a core constitutional question. Can a president, citing a national emergency, unilaterally impose tariffs without congressional approval? The court's answer is a resounding no, reaffirming the foundational principle of checks and balances. This decision not only dismantles a key part of the Trump administration's economic agenda, but also signals a turning point in how future administrations will approach trade policy. It sets a precedent that will constrain future presidents, making it clear that sweeping economic actions require legislative backing, not just executive will. The Treasury Department now faces the daunting task of processing up to $1 trillion in refunds to importers who paid the now illegal duties, a logistical and financial challenge that will take months, if not years, to resolve. The White House, long reliant on tariffs to pressure trade partners, must now find new, more complex ways to achieve its goals, ways that require congressional cooperation and diplomatic finesse rather than unilateral action. The decision redraws the boundaries of presidential authority, making it clear that no single branch can dominate the nation's economic destiny. It reaffirms Congress's primary role in trade and taxation, restoring a constitutional balance that many felt had been eroded in recent years. It challenges the idea that a national emergency can serve as a blank check for executive overreach, sparking a broader debate about the limits of presidential power in times of crisis. The debate over protectionism versus free trade now returns to Congress, where it belongs, inviting lawmakers to craft new policies that reflect the will of the people and the needs of the economy. The shockwaves from this decision will define political and economic discourse for years to come, influencing elections, shaping policy debates, and affecting the daily lives of millions of Americans. The future of American leadership on the world stage is now in question, as allies and rivals alike watch to see how the U.S. adapts to this new era of shared power and legislative oversight. The nation must adapt to a new era of shared power in trade policy, where collaboration, negotiation, and respect for constitutional boundaries will shape the next chapter of American commerce. The road to this Supreme Court ruling began in the lower federal courts, where the first legal challenges were filed and the initial arguments were heard. In these early stages, importers and business groups came together to challenge the president's authority to impose sweeping tariffs using emergency powers, arguing that such actions could disrupt global trade and harm American businesses. Lower courts consistently ruled against the administration, finding that the president lacked explicit power to set tariffs under the law cited. Judges emphasized that Congress, not the executive branch, holds the constitutional authority to regulate trade. Refusing to back down, the administration escalated the fight, seeking expedited Supreme Court review. Officials argued that ongoing legal uncertainty threatened not only their trade agenda, but also national security, making a swift resolution essential. The case quickly became a major constitutional showdown, evolving from a technical legal dispute into a test of presidential power and the limits of executive authority. Meanwhile, businesses across the country faced months of limbo, unable to predict the cost of imported goods or plan for the future. This uncertainty highlighted the real-world impact of broad executive actions on everyday Americans and the economy. The Supreme Court's decision to hear the case underscored its national importance, signaling that the outcome would have far-reaching consequences for the balance of power in government. Ultimately, the journey from the initial lawsuits to the final verdict reaffirmed a fundamental principle. Even the most powerful executive actions are subject to judicial review, and no branch of government is above the law. In the end, the American system of checks and balances has prevailed, demonstrating the enduring strength of the nation's constitutional framework and the rule of law. At the heart of the legal battle was the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, a 1977 law granting the president broad authority over international economic transactions during a national emergency. The Trump administration claimed IEPA allowed tariffs as a regulatory tool, but the statute never explicitly mentions tariffs or duties. Critics argued that the power to tax and levy duties is reserved for Congress as outlined in the Constitution. The law's omission of tariffs became the central pillar of the legal challenge. IEPA was intended to narrow, not expand, presidential powers during peacetime, ensuring legislative oversight. The Supreme Court agreed, ruling that emergency powers are substantial but not limitless, and cannot usurp Congress's explicit authority. This decision affirms that the president cannot bypass Congress on core legislative functions, like taxation. The boundaries of executive power have been clarified. The Trump administration argued that IEPA's broad language was designed for executive agility in a dangerous world. They claimed modern economic threats require the president to act quickly, including imposing tariffs without waiting for Congress. The administration framed tariffs as regulatory measures, not taxes, and cited past presidents' broad economic actions as precedent. Ultimately, the Supreme Court rejected this plea for pragmatic power, prioritizing constitutional separation of powers over executive necessity. The majority was unconvinced that modern challenges justify bypassing Congress. Opponents of the tariffs argued that only Congress can levy taxes, including tariffs, a foundational principle of American government. They dismantled the administration's reliance on IEPA, noting it never mentions tariffs, while other laws do so explicitly. The challengers showed that tariffs function as a tax on American businesses and consumers, not just a regulatory tool. By defining tariffs as a tax, they reinforced that only Congress can authorize such measures. The Supreme Court agreed, warning that unchecked executive power would undermine the constitutional order. Judicial restraint on executive overreach has been restored. The economic stakes were enormous, with consequences rippling far beyond the immediate headlines. This was not just a legal decision, it was a turning point for the entire U.S. economy. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent warned that voiding the tariffs would force the government to refund up to $1 trillion to importers, a staggering sum that would instantly reshape the federal budget. This payout represents one of the largest government liabilities in history, disrupting federal finances at a critical time when deficits are already high and economic uncertainty looms. The ruling removes duties from nearly 70% of U.S. goods imports previously targeted, leaving only a fraction under other tariffs. This sudden shift will alter the cost structure for thousands of businesses. The logistical challenge of unwinding the policy is unprecedented. Customs systems, supply chains, and accounting practices must all be rapidly adjusted, creating confusion and delays at every level. The tariffs were central to the administration's strategy to protect domestic industries. Now, that pillar has collapsed. Many companies that relied on these protections must quickly rethink their business models. Businesses must adapt to a new trade environment, and the transition will bring new disruptions. Some will seize fresh opportunities, while others may struggle to survive in a more competitive global market. Consumers may see lower prices on imported goods, but domestic industries face renewed competition from abroad. The effects will be felt in paychecks, job security, and the choices available on store shelves. The ruling creates both winners and losers across the economy. For every business that benefits, another may face new hardships, and workers in vulnerable sectors are left uncertain about the future. The decision was never just about constitutional principles, it's about the flow of $1 trillion and the direction of the U.S. economy. The stakes are as much about livelihoods as they are about law. The economic impact will be felt for years, shaping investment, employment, and the nation's place in the global marketplace for a generation to come. Anticipating a possible loss, the Trump administration developed backup plans to maintain its protectionist trade policies. One option, Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act, allowing tariffs on imports that threaten national security, a tool already used for steel and aluminum. Another Section 301 of the Trade Act, enabling targeted tariffs against unfair foreign trade practices. Both alternatives require investigations and public comment, slowing executive action and inviting new legal challenges. The administration's resolve to use tariffs remains, but legal and economic uncertainty persists. The Supreme Court decision is not the end of the tariff debate. The future of U.S. trade policy remains unsettled. Despite the legal defeat, the Supreme Court's decision may offer President Trump a political advantage. He can frame himself as a champion of American workers, thwarted by an out-of-touch judiciary, rallying his base with a narrative of defiance. The administration's warnings of financial ruin set the stage for this political maneuver. A legal loss becomes a campaign weapon, fueling a populist message against the establishment. The ruling is now part of a larger political story, shaping public perception and future discourse. The debate over tariffs and presidential power will remain central in American politics. The Supreme Court's majority opinion firmly defended the separation of powers, ruling that only Congress can levy taxes, including tariffs. The justices found that IEPA's broad language does not authorize the president to impose tariffs, which are a form of tax. The decision draws a clear line. Congress must explicitly delegate such core powers. The court rejected the idea that tariffs are merely regulatory, reaffirming their status as taxes. This ruling checks the expansion of executive power and reasserts Congress's primacy in economic policymaking. Future presidents will face stricter limits on emergency economic actions. The verdict closes one chapter of uncertainty but opens another as the nation seeks to balance decisive executive action with constitutional governance. The future of American trade policy will be shaped by this new precedent.